Hi, and welcome to Deep Events. We are the DEEPTalks project, and we are Deep Deutschland, a FAO, part of the Global Deep Network. DEEP stands for Dialogue, Empathic Engagement, and Peace Building. Welcome. Today we have special guest, Dr. Lars Brünjes. He is the Director of Education at Input Output Global and part of the Cardano blockchain project. Lars, welcome to today's Deep Talks. It's great to have you here.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Now, Lars, you are a doctor, or you have a PhD in mathematics.
That's right, yes.
And mathematics is a side that I don't know so well. But what I hope to do on the show today is to kind of make a connection between math and technology and solving real world problems that we can all probably relate to, or at least we are aware of in one form or another.
Mm-hmm.
Well, please, if you have anything you'd like to say or to introduce yourself. I know you used to live in Cologne.
That's right, yes.
And my wife and I, Wiebke and I, we are in Cologne now, and it's a small world.
It is indeed. Yes, my parents are still living in Cologne.
Okay, so you probably visit frequently.
Yes, that's right. Now I'm based in Regensburg. For my PhD, I went to Regensburg University, and then I liked it so much because I'm not really for big crowds, and Regensburg is a bit smaller and also very pretty, very old history and so on. So I like it here. So I stayed. But yeah, of course, I still have my roots in Cologne.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I do know a bit about, a little about your history in terms of you have traveled to quite a few countries. And I think we can get into this more in terms of your work with Cardano.
Sure.
But maybe we can just go into some questions. And just to start, I think there's a lot of people who don't really know the technology side or a lot about Cardano as a project. Some of us are from peace and conflict studies, which is what we kind of establish ourselves in for this project. And so we look at what kinds of problems and solutions there are in the social sphere, among other places.
Right.
And so maybe you could just start us out with a brief introduction of Cardano and blockchain, and we'll see where that goes.
Okay, sure. So, I mean, the motto of Cardano is to get financial services to the 3.5 billion people in the world that don't have them. So that should certainly align with your area of interest. And we try to achieve that with blockchain technology. And blockchain, I mean, best known example is Bitcoin, which started in 2008. And that provided a cryptocurrency, so people could transfer value in a trustless, decentralized setting. So without control of a central bank or a government, without censorship, people can freely transfer value. And that was great, of course, but somewhat limited. I mean, it was limited to this possibility. And then along came Ethereum that added the possibility to run so-called smart contracts. So not only can you just send money from A to B, you can encode specific rules for arbitrarily complex contracts that are enforced by the blockchain, again, in a decentralized, totally democratic, censorship-resistant way. And but both these, I mean, even though they had great ideas, they also suffer from problems. For example, they use a lot of energy due to how they achieve security. So it's like the energy consumption of a small country the size of Belgium or something. In Cardano, I mean, we call ourselves a blockchain third generation. So we basically offer all of that. I mean, cryptocurrency, transfer of value. Now we are just very close to releasing our smart contract capability, but in a much more efficient and sustainable and cheaper way. So that I think the energy consumption is a factor of 4 million lower than Bitcoin. So basically, you can run the whole Cardano network, the energy that a medium-sized house would need. And that makes it also much more decentralized. So which means that people all over the world can actually participate in the blockchain in so-called nodes. I mean, you always need these nodes that hold all the data and spread the information through the network. And in the case of Bitcoin and Ethereum, because it's so expensive and you need so much energy, that tends to centralize it to certain areas where energy is cheap. For example, there's a lot of Bitcoin mining going on in China or in like cold countries in the north. And it's basically impossible for a lot of developing countries to participate in that. And due to its different or more advanced technology, so-called proof of stake, in Cardano, you can run the software on an arbitrary laptop in principle. So that alone already makes it much more inclusive. Actually, we have so-called stake pool operators that operate these nodes all over the world, and on all continents except Antarctica. And right, and that combined with identity solutions, that will really enable people all over the world just with a cell phone to participate in this blockchain and this cryptocurrency, and thus have access to finance even if they don't have a bank account, for example.
So if we could maybe zoom in a little bit on these identity solutions, because I think most don't understand the decentralized identity and how that might be kind of a starting point to using dApps and the blockchain.
Right. Blockchain by itself, or Bitcoin or Ethereum, they don't have this identity, and you just identify yourself with some number, some so-called public key or whatever. But that is not tied to your person. So one person could have a number of these public keys. So there's no direct relation between like persons and these Bitcoin or Ethereum wallets. And identity system basically changes it and can tie your real world identity to you, and also to other things that should be tied to your person. So a good example is a project we do in Georgia, in the country of Georgia, where we work with Georgian universities. So our identity system is used to put diplomas on the blockchain and tie them to people, to their identity. And that makes it then easier to, for example, for people to apply for a job, because normally an employer would have to certify that make sure that the presented diploma is indeed authentic, and they need to require back at the university, for example, to make sure that there's no fraud. And using a blockchain-based system like this, it's much easier and much more reliable, and to prove that you have certain qualifications, for example. And of course, the diploma is just one example. It's the first use case we have, but you could also think of other things, like, I don't know, driver's licenses or whatever, medical records. Mm-hmm. And of course, it's because it's on the blockchain, there's no single point of failure. So if you think of like countries with civil war, for example, in Syria, I'm sure that a lot of people lost their documentation. And if it was on the blockchain, it's much easier to keep secure from natural catastrophes or also war. It makes it easier. Basically all you need is your cell phone, and then if you're a refugee, you can still prove who you are and what qualifications you have.
So basically in war zones or natural disasters, when you have internally displaced people, mm-hmm. they can still access like a passport or a driver's license, even if they lose everything.
Right.
Because it's
obviously they need internet access, but as soon as they get that, then they have access to their document, to their identity.
Okay, and so the digital, the decentralized identity is kind of a starting place for interacting with dApps, signing contracts. What are some of perhaps we can go into some of the dApps or the solutions to certain problems that Cardano is working on?
Sure. In general, I think it's a big thing, just this access to financial services. For example, loans. It's very difficult for many people in the world in developing countries to get a loan, even a small loan to start a small business, for example, if they don't have a bank account, for example. And using these decentralized apps, these DApps on blockchain, it's much, it evens the playing field. And there's this slogan, DeFi, Decentralized Finance, and that had quite a boom the recent years on Ethereum, where you can have completely trustless and decentralized exchanges, for example, or solutions for loans. So people all over the world can basically grant a loan, and then people all over the world can also take it. So it's much easier to get the investors together with the people that need money to invest and run their business. And so the blockchain is ideal for that, because you don't need a bank account, or if you are in a country where there is not much investment money, then that's also no problem, because you have access basically all over the world to people that are willing to provide the funds.
And just to recover, just to go over the name, they call this the unbanked.
Yes.
Or the underbanked, for example.
Right.
And when it comes to traditional finance, what are some of the barriers that have kept people out that decentralized finance solves?
I mean, I'm not an expert on finance, but I think it's as simple as that people simply don't have a bank account. And I don't know why. Maybe you need an address to open a bank account, or you need a passport or something, and people simply don't have that. So for various reasons, if you don't even have a bank account, then you also can't take out a loan at the bank, of course. So that's already, I mean, it's trivial, or for us, seemingly trivial reasons like that prevent people from having access to the global financial system.
And so in your role, because you're the director of education, you've traveled to quite a few countries.
Yes.
And perhaps you could take us through some of these projects that you work on and how they influence or are working in the bigger picture.
Of course. So the bigger picture is that we are very aware of this, the fear that many developing countries have, or the skepticism, if somebody from Europe or America comes there and says, hey, we solve all your problems, this arrogance. And so we wanted to avoid that. And we feel the best way to do that is to work with people on the ground, basically, that know about their own problems. And instead of going there and say, we solve your problems for you, we enable the people in those countries to solve their own problems. And for that, of course, they need to know how to work with our technologies. So that's where this education initiative started. And our technology is mostly written in a programming language called Haskell, which I like it very much. It's very mathematical, and it's also quite old. It's 30 years old by now, but it's not mainstream, so you can't expect people to know it. So we basically, our starting point was to teach people Haskell in certain countries, because then, as long as they have learned that Haskell and the basics of blockchain and cryptocurrency, they can then work with our technologies. And we tried that out in Greece, which of course is not a developing country, but just because we had ties to Greek universities. So that was the first course 4 years ago. Right. So it's these very intense courses. So the way it worked was that I physically go there for 2 months, let's say, and then it's a full-time course. 5 days a week, teaching Haskell and doing exercises and so on. So as I said, we tried that out in Greece and it was very successful. So we ended up hiring most of the students there. And then the next one was Barbados, which is already, developing country. But the big one was 2 years ago, and that's the one I'm proudest of. That was in Ethiopia, so where we ran a course for 22 women. So that was an all-female course as well. I believe it was the International Year of Women. So that was, but in any case, so I thought that was a great idea. So we had 18 Ethiopian students and 4 from Uganda. I think that I taught Haskell in the course of 10 weeks. And that was really also for me personally very very profound experience. So yes, so go there, teach them this programming language, teach them about Cardano and blockchain, and then possibly hire them afterwards. So a couple of the Ethiopian women are now working for us in Ethiopia, which I think is also a great thing about our industry, that we are completely remote. So I work from home, and all my colleagues, most of my colleagues work from home. So it's no problem for example, our Ethiopian students to work from Addis Ababa for us. So you don't get this usual brain drain that as soon as people from developing countries are educated, they get a job in the US or in Europe and then don't support their own country any longer. So yeah, I think that's great. And of course, it also creates trust. So I was meeting the responsible minister in Ethiopia quite frequently, and he was very grateful as well that we come and offer this course, and that of course creates trust and then opens up opportunities and encourages governments, for example, to look at our technologies and see how they could be applied to solve the problems in their countries. And last year, sorry, I just want to finish. So last year I would have been in Mongolia, but then COVID happened. So we still did a course with Mongolian students, but that was then a virtual one. And next year, hopefully travel will be possible again. We plan to do one in Ghana, but the details are not yet fixed. But yeah, sorry for interrupting you.
No worries. Actually, I just wanted to go back to the beginning of what you were saying. And one of the reasons I thought Cardano was so interesting is because of this bottom-up approach where you're teaching on the ground, and it's kind of through education, empowering people to solve problems through coding, which is developing DApps.
Right.
And,
yes,
so,
sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, so maybe you could just touch on some of these DApps and how people from the bottom up, grassroots, can look at problems in their local environment and then perhaps come up with a solution.
Sure. It's good that we have this interview now and not 2 months ago or so, because as I mentioned briefly before, the DApps are not yet in Cardano. They will be released very soon. So in all these courses, these Haskell courses, I did talk a bit about DApps, but it was all very theoretical because it didn't really exist. There were like playgrounds and stuff, but it was more theoretical. But now that we're getting very close to the so-called Alonso release that will integrate these DApps into the Cardano platform, I'm running a massive online course these days with more than 1,500 students. And there I'm teaching DApps writing, so our smart contract language. And there are also, of course, students from all over the world. And using that, it's possible to write DApps for loans or swaps or exchanges or auctions, all sorts of things that you can imagine that. And that I show that in the course, and now people already, some of the students are already working on their little private or personal projects to try it out. So I'm very hopeful that after this course, we will have like 1,000 or 2,000 people all over the world that actually know how to create these DApps and then are able to apply them to their own problems or business ideas.
And just for anyone who might not know what a DApp is, it's a decentralized application.
Yes, so the idea is that normal contracts, if you have any sort of contract, it's enforced by the legal system of the country of jurisdiction. So if you take a loan from the bank and then you don't pay your installments, then the bank can sue you, and then you get in trouble with the government, or the police, and or you end up in jail or whatever. But in a decentralized setting as blockchain, of course, you don't have that. There is no clear jurisdiction. So the idea of a DApp is to, instead of using the legal system to enforce rules, you use mathematics and code. So basically, you have a piece of code that gives the rules. says, okay, these funds can be unlocked under this and this and this condition. So if this person signs, and if it's before that time, then he can take so and so much money out, but then he also must pay so and so much to this person, and so on. So you can define these rules in code, and then they are enforced by the blockchain. So you don't need a judge or anybody to decide about disputes. So it's completely, I mean, it's just code. So it's absolutely precise. Everybody can see the rules, and it's guaranteed with mathematical guarantee, basically, that these rules will be enforced. So everybody can rely on it. So you don't have to trust the other parties in the contract that they will do their thing. It's enforced by the blockchain itself. And yeah, DAPP, that's basically that, or that's called smart contract. And then normally when people talk about DAPP, they also include the user interface. So normally you have a nice web interface, so it feels as if you basically do online banking, but instead of talking to your bank, you actually talk to the blockchain to make it nice. And this whole package, including your nice UI and the rules that are on the blockchain, that's normally called a DAPP, a decentralized application.
And another interesting part about the blockchain, the Cardano blockchain, would you describe it as agnostic, in the sense that it's not biased in the sense that it's mathematical code? And so I think this is going back to the trustless aspect of smart contracts. Could you just go into a bit more on why they're trustless and why people don't have to rely on a central government or a central bank to allow these to happen?
I mean, as much as I would love to say that only Cardano does that, of course, in all fairness, one must say that all blockchains do that. I mean, that is common in all blockchains, or at least in the permissionless blockchains. I mean, you also get blockchains that are deployed by companies in like internal networks. But I mean, if you talk about these global ones like Bitcoin or Ethereum or Cardano, they all have this property. And that is basically the whole point, that, I mean, the problem that blockchain solves, that you, I mean, I always explain blockchain. I mean, you can forget about all the mathematics. I mean, the concept that blockchain implements is a ledger in the cloud or in the sky. So a big book in which you can make entries, and that those entries are indelible and uneditable. So it's like writing with indelible ink in this book, make entries, and this book is decentralized. It's in the cloud, so it doesn't sit on any specific server that is controlled by any specific government. And the idea, I mean, how that is possible is it's basically replicated by these so-called nodes. So there are thousands of nodes, pieces of software running, the same piece of software running on thousands of computers all over the world. And they basically all have their own copy of this ledger, of these entries. And then the magic happens. How do you coordinate them? So if a new entry, if several new entries come in, all the nodes all over the world have to agree which entries are in the book and which are not, and in which order are they in. And that's where so-called consensus algorithms come in. And that is also why Bitcoin and Ethereum are so expensive, because they use a consensus algorithm that's called proof of work. So in order to achieve that, this coordination between these thousands of people, you have to solve computational problems, stupid problems. It doesn't matter, the solution doesn't matter, it just matters that you solve them, and that takes a lot of time. And that is then somehow leveraged to guarantee the security of the blockchain. And we use a different system, not proof of work, proof of stake, so you don't have this computational overhead. But the bottom line is that basically the data is replicated thousands of times, and there are ingenious algorithms that guarantee that as long as a majority of these people is honest and follow the protocol faithfully, no matter what the minority does, they can't destroy this consensus. So they can't destroy the fact that you have these thousands of copies of the same data that everybody agrees on. And because it's replicated 1,000-fold, or tens of thousands, there is no government or no entity that can influence it or censor it or delete it or alter it after the fact. So this massive replication of the data and then the coordination between those, that is the key how blockchain is decentralized.
And by the way, Cardano became completely decentralized recently, correct?
Right. Yes. Yes. So historically, when we started 3 years ago, it was basically run by a federation, so there were just 8 nodes. And then last summer, we switched to the so-called Shelley era, where in principle it was decentralized, but we just wanted to be careful, and we didn't just want to throw a switch to basically switch from 8 nodes to 10,000 nodes in one go. So we had this this parameter, this gradual thing. So in the beginning, there were only, I mean, for still mostly the federated nodes, but then a higher and higher percentage of the rest of the world started creating nodes. And just recently, as you say, this parameter now reached 0 and or 1. I never know which way around.
Mm-hmm.
But in any case, so now the federated nodes are out, and it's totally in the hands of the so-called stake pools in these nodes that are distributed all over the world. And that makes it actually much more decentralized than Bitcoin, for example. So yeah.
And so if we can just expand on the trustless smart contracts a bit and the overall blockchain, Cardano's blockchain is designed through peer review journal articles.
That's
And
right.
can you just go into a little bit about this approach, which is quite different from what I know of other blockchains?
Exactly. I mean, there's no doubt that the creators of Bitcoin or Ethereum were brilliant people, and that they, I mean, the ideas are marvelous. But I mean, there was a white paper, so somebody wrote down the ideas, and that's it. And then, so there, I mean, even though it turned out that the ideas were good, it was not really justified or formally justified. So Cardano decided to take a different approach and follow the scientific approach. I mean, that was, of course, tremendously successful in human history, and especially in the last couple of centuries. So, and the scientific approach is peer review. So you don't just, I mean, when a researcher publishes something, other researchers of the same area read it and comment on it, and if they find a problem, then it doesn't get published. And this way, the scientific community holds itself in check and holds up a high level of standard and rigor. So I mean, you see that. I mean, for example, there's a huge difference in quality. I mean, you do get these servers like X archives where everybody can publish papers. And though, I mean, there you find all these crackpot ideas and the Fermatists and, I mean, all these crazy ideas. So you see that as soon as you don't have this peer review anymore, the quality like just goes down. But I mean, for proper science, this peer review is standard in all sorts of, I mean, basically in all scientific disciplines, including mathematics and computer science. So Cardano approach was to not do this white paper thing, just write your ideas and put them out on the internet without anybody vetting them, but instead follow this well-established scientific approach. So, I mean, research first. So we work with, I mean, we have a big team of researchers, and we also work with various universities and have partnerships with various universities all over the world, like Tokyo Tech and University of Edinburgh, University of Wyoming, and several others. And so everything started with a scientific paper that was then properly peer reviewed before it was published. I believe by now we have 85 peer reviewed papers, something like that, and 100 in total. So 15 or so are still in the process of being peer reviewed. And so that we can be sure that the science that everything is based on is on very firm foundations, using the gold standard that is used in other scientific or engineering disciplines as well. And then only then, once the scientists have done their job and have developed these protocols, then our engineers take that and implement it in code. And there again, of course, one could make mistakes. I mean, no matter how great the science is, if you have, if your engineers make a mistake, you could still end up with garbage. So we also invest a lot of time and effort into so-called formal methods, where basically the goal is that you can prove that your code is correct, or at least, if not prove, make it very, very likely. So we deploy that as well. So it doesn't, our rigor doesn't stop at the science. We also continue that when it comes to engineering, to make sure that the chain from scientific peer-reviewed paper to running software is basically flawless, and there's no weak link where something can go wrong. So yeah, that is a very important. That is basically the foundation, or the principle that we deploy to build our software.
So if we just kind of focus on the research a bit,
Mm-hmm.
I've read that in the planning for Cardano, there was a lot of different areas, from game theory
Mm-hmm.
To governance. And
right.
maybe could you open up a few of these different areas that were crucial in designing the Cardano blockchain? Because I think it was kind of built so that you could run an entire government on it.
Right, sure. I mean, of course, I mean, an obvious scientific area that you need is cryptography, because all these algorithms use cryptography. But that's not all, as we already said. For example, game theory, that's incidentally a part that I was also involved in, because I don't just teach, I also do some research on the side, including this game theory aspect. That comes in, you have all these nodes, these 1,000 nodes, and somehow you want to make them do the right thing. So you want to set incentives for them so that they get rewarded for following the protocol. But you want to set the incentives exactly right, so that if they act in their own best interest to maximize their rewards, that you get an outcome that is desirable. And that is like the area of game theory, where, I mean, you have like different strategies in a game, and you pick one that's most profitable for you, and then you can study what will happen in the system if everybody tries to maximize their profit. What will be the outcome? So there we use game theory, and also worked with prominent game theorists to set up an incentive scheme where the incentives are just right to get the people to, I mean, so that we get this nice decentralized outcome where you have 1,000 nodes that are all of relative equal size, so none gets too powerful and so on. So that's how the game theory comes in. And governance, this will we will tackle after the, I mean, I mentioned the smart contracts that are coming now. That's so-called Alonso, or Gogang, actually, Gogang era. And then afterwards, we will have Voltaire. So that's the final goal of Cardano development, to hand over all control to the community, so that it's a self-governing entity. So that's a bit in the future still, but we do already have pilot projects that are very promising. We have something called Project Catalyst, where we try these online voting systems, and there basically IOG and other partners provided money for projects, and then people decentralized all over the world can create projects and apply for, I mean, register the projects with these Project Catalyst. And then we try out our online voting, blockchain-based online voting, where people can vote for various projects, and then the winners get the funds. So that's basically it. So that's already, so we already we do this in several rounds. I believe right now we have round 4 or 5. I'm not completely sure. So there are already people that got funded like that. And that, of course, is also very interesting for developing countries, because normally it's difficult for somebody that has a good idea and sits in a developing country to get venture capital from Silicon Valley or whatever. But by using something like this, it's much more level playing field for good ideas to describe themselves and then apply for funding, and then the whole world basically votes about it. And yes, and then the idea is to integrate that into Cardano itself. We already have something called the treasury. So every 5 days or so, a certain portion of money is put aside in the so-called treasury. And then the goal is that eventually the whole community can vote how the money of the treasury is used to, for example, improve Cardano or add new features or fix bugs and so on. So in the end, everything will be decentralized, will be self-funded and controlled by voting. So liquid democracy, basically.
In essence, the blockchain itself is its own functioning democracy,
right?
With a treasury, a decentralized model, and it would it would basically continue on its own.
Exactly. That's the idea, that it's self-sustaining. Because that's also a big problem with other blockchains, that they don't have that. And then even if the technology in principle is sound, you always have to worry about where the funding is coming from in 10 years or in 20 years. But Cardano has that basically built in, that it's guaranteed that there will always be funds to do maintenance and add new features and develop it further.
And
So, yeah.
in terms of the treasury and the funds, you said a part of the funds come from donations or from third-party actors, but is there also a mechanism within Cardano, like transactions or?
What I said earlier, that it comes from IG or from partners, that was for this Catalyst, Project Catalyst, this that we just
Okay.
used to try out our voting. Cardano itself has its own treasury. So there's, we don't rely on donors or anything. So there's just this, I mean, yes, transaction. I mean, there are two sources. First, we do the thing that other blockchains also do, that we have. I mean, right now there are, I mean, our currency is called ADA, and I think right now there's something like 31 billion ADA in circulation, but we have a theoretical cap of 45 billion ADA, so there's still 14 billion in reserve, and every 5 days we release a small percentage of the ones in reserve. Part of that money is used to pay rewards to the nodes, what I mentioned before, where the game theory comes in, but part also goes to the treasury. And of course, that would run out at some point because it's only a finite amount. But another source, the second source, is transaction fees. So whenever you have to, you do something on the blockchain, you do a transaction, you have to pay a small fee, a small amount of fees. And there again, part of those fees is used to incentivize the nodes to do their job, but a part is also taken to the treasury. So by using the blockchain, automatically funds are aggregated in the treasury that can then be used to, I mean, fund development or other projects.
And in terms of not only Cardano's governance system, but a nation state or another country could run their country on the blockchain. Isn't that one of the goals? And could you go into that a little bit?
I mean, you can certainly run certain aspects of your country on the blockchain. I mean, I mentioned before the diplomas in Georgia. I mean, things like that you can certainly do. If you now go into democracy, I mean, at least in the sense that, I mean, this online voting, for example, is not trivial. I mean, you can't just do it naively because so a lot of thought goes into that. For example, often there will be proposals for funds where the average community member has no clue whether that makes sense or not. So you have to rely on experts. But then, of course, there's again the problem: how do you know that an expert is good and that the expert is reliable and trustworthy and so on? So that all goes into this voting system that we develop. So a mechanism to like delegate your votes to expert for certain votes, and then like a reputation system for expert that you see, okay, in the past, this expert always voted for like good projects, or this one voted for bad projects. So all of this, I mean, it's a very complicated problem, but I think by solving that now for the special case of blockchain, certainly in the future one could imagine also applying that to a nation. I'm not sure whether we have concrete plans for that just yet, but I suppose it's, I mean, of course, it's a very big step in that direction. Yes, to solve these problems, because I mean, that is normally the issue with this liquid democracy thing. How do you, I mean, you also, people don't want to vote all the time, maybe, or only vote on topics that are of interest to them. Maybe I don't care about whatever agrarian policy. I just want to vote on something that's close to my heart, like education. And how you can do that people can delegate things they are not interested in to experts, but then vote on key issues for themselves. And all these mechanisms that we are developing now, I'm sure they will be useful if you actually want to apply it to a whole nation eventually.
One of the I guess So one of the problems with just voting in general for like a president or a leader of a country, technically you could, with the digital ID and a smartphone, you could hold national elections on the blockchain. That's
Principle,
possible. What it would be.
yes, I think so, yes. But of course, there's big skepticism, I mean, for this electronic voting thing. I mean, people already don't trust the, I mean, like in the US elections, there's already controversy, and that is like on paper. So if it was some mysterious blockchain algorithm, probably maybe people would be even less confident.
Yeah, I am sure there would be a lot of fake news and clickbait going around the internet. Well then, so you mentioned the native currency of Cardano is ADA,
That's right.
ADA,
Yes,
and
named after Ada Lovelace, the very first programmer and friend of Lord Byron, that wrote the first computer program in the world, even though there was no computer. So he had this analytical engine designed, but couldn't build it due to mechanical limitations in the 19th century. But she wrote programs for it, like on paper. So she is the first programmer. And so we named our cryptocurrency after her. And we also have like a smaller denomination, like dollars and cents. We have Ada and Lovelace. So that's where the name comes from.
okay, and this is like the for those who don't know a lot about blockchain, ADA is the currency of the blockchain. And so could you go into a little bit how this currency can help people in terms of payments or running DApps? What are some of the use cases of it?
Right. That's, I mean, first of all, you can, using so-called exchanges, you can convert between so-called fiat currencies like euro or dollar and ADA, for example. I mean, same to other cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin or Ethereum. So you can, I mean, one use case that already exists right now is if I want to send money to another country, then I can, in principle, exchange euro to ADA, then transfer the ADA instantaneously and very cheaply, and then the recipient can, in his country, exchange it back to whatever currency he uses. So that, of course, is one use case. Then with the coming of DApps, as I mentioned before, there are transaction fees. And in particular for DApps, you also have to pay for execution. So if you're a smart contract, I mean, that's a piece of code that has to run, so that uses resources. So you have to pay for it. So there's like a small fee for execution. The longer it runs, the higher the fee. And then for memory consumption. So in any case, so people need ADA, for example, to pay for their smart contracts as well. So that's one use case. And of course, for all these things we mentioned before, like identity systems and so on, for example, maybe if you want to share your diploma with somebody, then you need a small fee to pay to make that happen on the blockchain. So the more of these services we see in actually rolled out and deployed in the real world, the more useful ADA will also become, because then, I mean, you can use ADA to pay for these services.
And what about, for example, often NGOs, a huge part of non-governmental organizations is fundraising, and there's a huge percentage of the funds that have to go to bureaucracy or fees to transfer money. And so how could the Cardano blockchain, for example, help facilitate fundraising and guarantee some sort of transparency in terms of where the money goes?
Right. I mean, several aspects. I mean, first of all, even though I was talking about transaction fees now, they are much lower than the transaction fees you pay if you use a traditional bank account. For example, I mean, it depends on the blockchain, but I mean, each blockchain has their specific rules. We are actually very cheap in comparison to, for example, Ethereum or Bitcoin, as far as our transaction fees are concerned. But for example, in Cardano, the transaction fees only depend on the size of a transaction, size in the sense of bytes. So how much memory does it take, not in the amount. So you can basically transfer 1 million ADA or 1 billion ADA for the same transaction fees that you would need for 10 ADA. And that is low. I mean, it depends a bit, of course, on the exchange rate of ADA, but it's less than 1 ADA. And right now, we had our all-time high some days ago where 1 ADA was $1.50. So anyway, it's something like 10 US dollar cents or so to send funds. Whereas if I use a traditional bank for a high amount, I mean, it's like tens or hundreds or even thousands of dollar transaction fees. That's one thing. And then you mentioned transparency. I mean, one nice thing about blockchain is that, I mean, all the data is out there in the open. So, I mean, there are so-called blockchain explorers where you can now look at every single transaction in the history of ADA, every single transaction, every single block. And everybody can do that in the world. So nobody can hide anything. And as I also mentioned before, the key feature of blockchain is it's like written with indelible ink. So nobody can like cover their tracks afterwards or after the fact try to manipulate something and make it look different. So everything is completely auditable and out there to see for everyone, which of course is also good for or against corruption, because it's impossible to hide what you're doing. Everything is publicly visible for the whole world. And the third aspect I would say that also makes it easier is that, I mean, because we have this international global system that all sorts of parties can use, you also don't have this problem with proprietary data formats and so on. So it would be much easier for various organizations to work together using Cardano, for example, to transfer funds or do various transactions. And there's not this compatibility problem that with different standards and so on. So that also helps.
Okay. So I was curious about if you could explain a little bit about these 5 focus countries in Africa. These are projects that I've read about in terms of Cardano's 5 focus pilot projects. And I believe Kenya, Tanzania, South Africa, Nigeria, and Ethiopia.
Unfortunately, I don't know much about those except Ethiopia because I spent 2 months of my life there. But we do have a Africa special coming up on Thursday, where we, I mean, announce a very big project. So maybe people that are interested in those 5 can watch that on Thursday.
Okay.
So, I mean, I know in general, obviously, that we have various activities in Africa, but I don't know any details, unfortunately, about the other countries except Ethiopia.
Mm-hmm. I read that a bit about, I think in Tanzania, a partnership with a telco company.
Mm-hmm.
And earlier you mentioned with internet,
right?
That would be a huge hurdle.
Right. That is true. Yes, that I know. So exactly. I mean, I said everybody. I mean, the unbanked that don't have a bank account, all they need is a cell phone and internet access. And of course, I mean, that is not guaranteed in developing countries that everybody has internet access. So we're also working on that. You're right. For example, partnering up with a telecom company to push internet coverage in developing countries. There are also other things that we're working on. They're so-called trusted hardware. Basically, your chip or your phone can't lie, which makes it even possible to not have internet access. So basically, you do your thing on your phone, and this trusted hardware guarantees that you can't manipulate it. And then when eventually after 2 weeks or so you have internet access again, then it gets synchronized with the rest of the world. So we're also thinking about things like that to make it as easy as possible for everybody to be able to actually access the blockchain. But yes, that this partnership that was announced a while ago with this telco company, yes, that's right.
And I was just to go back to the tension between transparency and privacy. We kind of mentioned how blockchain allows for transparency because every transaction is recorded on the blockchain, and you can literally search and see every transaction, but it doesn't necessarily give you private details. So it's transparent, but yet private. And I was wondering if you could just go into that a bit and how that might be a problem with certain governments and bad faith actors, perhaps, that want perhaps more of your private data.
Right. I mean, one thing is that Cardano has also been designed in a modular way. So that was always the vision. That, I mean, there are certain parts like this consensus algorithm and various and the governance algorithm and various other parts. And we also do research on privacy preserving blockchains, where basically all transactions are completely anonymous and you can't be, I mean, nothing what you do, I mean, nobody can see that you receive funds or send funds. So that's also possible. And we also have this side or work on this side chain concept where you can have several different blockchains work together with each other. So basically you can take funds from one blockchain and somehow freeze them on that one and transfer to another one and then do your thing on the other one, and then afterwards somehow transfer the funds back. So one solution to your problem could be to use these side chains and then do sensitive private stuff on a different blockchain on a side chain that has these special privacy features. And that same mechanism can also be used for, I mean, you mentioned countries. I mean, there are regulations or tax laws or know your client laws or whatever. So it's also possible to have, like, for specific countries, specific tailor-made blockchains that follow the laws in those countries and make sure that those laws are automatically enforced, and then communicate with Cardano, with the main Cardano blockchain. So that is certainly an issue. And then, of course, there are also various cryptographic tricks that you can do. I'm not a cryptographer, but I mean, for example, on the public blockchain that's publicly visible, you can just have something like a digest, not the real private data. And the real private data you keep somewhere private, but by having the digest on the blockchain, you can't manipulate the private data, but it's also not visible. And then if it's, for example, medical data or so, you wouldn't put your medical data on the blockchain just like a digest. And then when you want to share it with the doctor, you can prove that this is the right data because it fits with the public digest, something like that, that you can do. So, I mean, it's not necessarily a contradiction that because everything is transparent and out in the open, that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to say goodbye to privacy. So there are certainly ways to have both.
So Cardano, it's very flexible in the sense that it can be adjusted for local laws and regulations in different countries.
Yes, I mean, the Cardano, it depends what you mean by Cardano. I mean, Cardano, the blockchain is, of course, a thing that's there internationally, and that is what it is. But the technology that we use to build Cardano, I mean, the software itself, that is in this toolbox approach that you can plug and play, basically, and could add something like regulation if that's required. And then basically deploy a different blockchain that uses similar software or the same software in a different configuration that would then be suitable for specific use cases like countries with specific regulations.
Just to go back to ADA for a little bit, countries like Zimbabwe and Venezuela, and even more recently, Turkey has had problems with inflation with their local currency. And so how do you see ADA as an alternative, or perhaps a government issued central digital currency?
I mean, it's certainly, I mean, one of the big advantages of cryptocurrencies, in particular ADA, of course, is that it's completely independent of the normal economy, and also out of reach of government influence. So, I mean, inflation, I mean, I'm also, as I said, I'm not an economist, but I mean, for example, if a government starts printing money, then you may get inflation. And in ADA or also other cryptocurrencies, this is also a mathematical rule. I mean, how monetary expansion happens, if it happens. So that is in code, unchangeable mathematical rules that decide at any given point how many units of your currency are in circulation. I mentioned before this 31 that we have now, 45, but I mean, that is fixed. I mean, we can't just change that and print 100 million or 100 billion ADA more. So it's very reliable because everybody knows the rules, so it's completely predictable how much there will be. So you don't have this reason for inflation that you have in other currencies, that suddenly a government decides to print a lot and that devaluates everything. So that is already one reason why cryptocurrencies, I mean, they are not subject to the whims of governments or central banks. Of course, you still see fluctuations in cryptocurrencies. I mean, so it's not really, I mean, it's not as stable as the US dollar or the euro, but there's also research in so-called stable coins that tackle that problem. So to make a cryptocurrency even, or to have some derivative on Cardano, for example, a so-called stable coin that then is stable and doesn't have these course fluctuations. And that would make it even more attractive for people, countries like Venezuela, Turkey, where the native currency encounters massive inflation.
Okay. And so I'm just curious, your own personal journey and experience in Cardano. What are you the most excited about, and what is your biggest interest?
It's hard to say. I mean, I love mathematics, obviously, and programming and so on. So like from that aspect, from the intellectual aspect, I'm very excited about these smart contracts because it's really fun. I mean, what you can all build. I mean, you can do everything from something as trivial as games to I mean, decentralized finance that can help millions of people. So that is certainly fun from that point of view. But of course, I also I mean, I love teaching. So as far as my heart is concerned, I'm most excited about these aspects to basically bring education to developing countries. And because I really see already with these nodes that I mentioned before, that already enables people in developing countries to run small businesses. I mean, these nodes generate a certain incentive reward every 5 days. So already we see lots of these little nodes pop up as so-called stake pools in Africa and Latin America, where people basically live off Cardano. And I envision that with coming of the smart contracts, there's a whole new opportunity for developers all over the world that don't need to get employment with a traditional software company. They can just basically on their computer, wherever they live on the world, write a DAPP that can have a tremendous influence. So it's good for people all over. I mean, for these developers, because they have like a business model or a way to make money on programming, and of course for everybody else, because there will be thousands of interesting apps coming up. So I mean, that I'm very excited about, that this now massive, that everybody can participate and everybody together can build something great without needing access to traditional universities or capital.
It seems like a massive macro shift in how the world will function once it comes into reality and it's used in different countries. For example, you mentioned anyone with developer skills or coding skills could generate their own business in whatever location they find themselves in.
Right.
And so you unlock all this potential and completely what I think mind-blowing system that you know, every corner has a new use case, but it's still early.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, often, I think IOG employs brilliant people, but I mean, no matter what one company does, you you can never basically have the same the access to the same pool that the whole world population of developers can provide. So I'm sure there are hundreds of great ideas out there somewhere that we at IOG would never think of. So by enabling basically the whole world to participate and deploy their own apps on Cardano, we tap this huge potential and ideas from different cultures and different backgrounds that we would never think of ourselves. So that is very exciting, I think.
And before maybe we could take some questions, but where do you see it in 10 years? Just a little future question in terms of the vision.
Well, the vision is that in 10 years, I mean, our CEO always says that in 10 years, we are basically not necessary anymore as a company, at least not for Cardano. I mean, the vision is that in 10 years, Cardano will govern itself and finance itself. And so, I mean, obviously, hopefully, we will still exist and work on other exciting projects. But I mean, the vision is that in 10 years, it governs itself. It has millions of users. Huge transactions are run by that whole countries, maybe, or the diploma systems of whole countries are run by it, and transfer of funds between countries is greatly cheaper than it is these days. And yeah, so let's hope.
Great. Do you have time for a few questions?
Yes, sure.
Okay. Then we'll turn it over, and if anyone has a question, Lars is open to taking them. Here we go. Let's see. How about Raspberry Pi? This is from Socks. As hosted nodes for Cardano.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Is that the question already, or?
Yeah, I believe, like, can you use a Raspberry Pi?
Right. Yes, you can. We had, I mean, again, in pre-corona days, we used to have annual company meetings. And the last one was 2 years ago in Miami Beach. And there, one of the guests proudly presented a Raspberry Pi and how he ran our Cardano node on his Raspberry Pi. So yes, and that shows the difference in order of magnitude between Bitcoin mining, for example, and Cardano. So yes, indeed, it can run on a Raspberry Pi.
All right, and so another question from Socks. Is there any idea to branch from Haskell to something like Ruby or R?
Well, Haskell, I mean, we use basically Haskell in two capacities. I mean, first, all our software is written in Haskell, or most of our software. But that is actually not really important for users. I mean, why would they care? The second more interesting aspect for users is that our smart contract language, our main smart contract language, Plutus, is also more or less Haskell. It's just, I mean, it's a like special version of Haskell. Right. And that obviously increases the entry barrier for people who want to start writing DApps, because Haskell has quite a steep learning curve. And there we indeed have plans to enable many more smart contract languages. For example, also Solidity, that is now used for Ethereum, and something called Glow, which is also a very nice language. So in principle, in future, there will be many ways to write DApps for Cardano, not just Haskell or Plutus. If you are asking about the node itself, the software itself, I'm not sure whether we plan that. But of course, I mean, nobody is stopping you from implementing your own Cardano node in Rust or R. So I've never heard that somebody uses R to do something like that, but Ruby. Yes, it's certainly possible, but I don't know whether I have never heard that we plan to use Ruby. But yes, for smart contracts, definitely you can expect that you can use other languages, not just Haskell, in the near future to write smart contracts.
And Socks says, thank you, Dr. Brünjes.
Welcome. Any other questions? Am I supposed to be able to read them as well in the chat? Or what?
Actually, you can. If you click the chat, they should come up.
Right. Okay, yeah, I see the socks question.
I think one more.
Oh yeah, one more. Sure, go ahead. Can he come on mic?
Yeah. No problem. You can speak too.
Oh, great. I can just talk faster than I can type. First of all, thanks Kevin for having me. Cryptocurrency is one of my deep passions. I think it's awesome. But as you build and like I was listening to you saying, like, you're truly at Cardano is a truly isolated project, something that should be self-sufficient, that can help others in ways and requires much less power. I think that's amazing. That means that I mean, when we talk about global warming and space in general, like, you require less footprint, right? So that's super great. I'm just thinking about integrations, right? As we move forward toward transferring from, I guess, fiat currency or the credit card lifestyle into a more crypto existence, how do you see your scaling, moving from where you are today to like in the next 2 years? Is this something that I can, that I can just, I mean, on a very much smaller scale to your passion, within education, right? In America, we have something called we have something called lunch programs, and inside lunch programs, they address the lower economic advantaged families, right? So if you don't make certain amount, you can have access to X amount of money as supported by your state or your area. So I'm just thinking, when you talk and I think about, the uses and the benefits, I think of Chicago public schools that, in order to mitigate fraud, right? We can definitely say that we passed 23 units to those 23 students in need toward getting food, right? So is that an accurate utilization of your product, or is that something that could be used, or am I just being crazy?
No, I think in general, sure, you can use something like that. And scaling, I mean, Cardano is already, I mean, has a much higher throughput than, for example, Ethereum. And I mentioned this Gorgon, the smart contracts, and I mentioned the self-governance, but I did skip one step, and that is exactly for scaling. So there's a step in between where we will also, I mean, scale several orders of magnitudes to really enable millions. I mean, the goal is to have hundreds of millions of users eventually, and that will certainly be possible. For your specific use case, sure. I mean, things like that, I think, are possible. I mean, of course, it depends what exactly you want there with your lunch program, but sure, you could do that in, I mean, that the people, I mean, get like a token, and then they can use that to exchange it for lunch, for example. People are already minting NFTs and all sorts of tokens on Cardano now. So yes, I'm sure things like that are possible.
And the scalability, just so that I understand correctly, is tied directly to the decentralized nodes that exist that support the overall ecosystem, right?
It's actually, I mean, having many nodes doesn't really help right now, because all these nodes have exactly the same data. So you don't, by having more nodes, you somehow don't increase the capacity. So you need something else for that. I mean, we're already quite good. As I said, it's 10 times faster, so more throughput than Ethereum. But you need other mechanisms like sharding, where not every node has the same data and it's somehow distributed, so you can really make use of having more nodes that then you also have bigger capacity. And there are other things, I don't know whether you've heard of Lightning Network that was first invented for Bitcoin. So there are ways to, we call it Hydra, because many heads. So you basically you only need the Cardano blockchain, the main blockchain, for like checkpoints, and you can offload a massive amount of transactions offline, basically. So it's not on the blockchain itself. It happens very fast and basically for free and massively parallel next to the blockchain, but the blockchain still guarantees that nobody can cheat and everybody gets their money in the end and so on. So we're working on that there are already prototypes for that, and that will allow us to scale up to hundreds of millions of users.
One more question, a follow-up to what you said just recently in the networking realm. When we're talking about servers and sharding and distributed storage, there's sometimes the implementation of something called an arbiter bit. Is that kind of the, if you're familiar with it, is that kind of the direction that Cardano uses to resolve the deltas across all of the data or the nodes that's trying to reconcile what's inside of their ledgers independently?
I'm sorry, I unfortunately don't know anything about networking. I mean, I know that it exists, the research that is done, but unfortunately, I don't know anything about the technical details. Can't help you there. Sorry.
Let's see. All right. Thanks, Stocks. Thanks for the questions.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh yeah.
That's okay.
Let's see. I have a question. How can Cardano bypass authoritarian restrictions or countries that wouldn't want Cardano in their territory, which is an odd territory because it's the internet?
Yes, I mean, I think it's almost impossible for a country to do that. I mean, it depends probably on how sophisticated they monitor your specific internet traffic. But in principle, everybody can, I mean, the software, you can just run the software and so I don't know. I mean, I'm not also not an expert on cybersecurity and so on, so I don't know what capabilities nation states have to restrict internet traffic. But as long as people have like access to the internet, free access, it's also not, I mean, it's not like specific websites that the governments could block. I mean, like
yeah,
some countries, like for example, block access to certain like porn sites or whatever. But I mean, because it's a decentralized network, there's not one or a handful of internet addresses that you could block and then access to Cardano, which we block, because it's a peer-to-peer network. So you, I mean, you directly connect to peers all over the world. So I think it would be extremely difficult to restrict that for a government. And I also see there's this question, how is the blockchain secured or defended from hackers or mean-spirited people? I mean, there's this thing, this mathematical theorem that's also true for Bitcoin, but also for us, that as long as the majority of people is honest or uncompromised by hackers, the system is secure. So even if 45% or so are hacked, you can prove basically that the blockchain is still consistent and the data is still consistent. That's yeah, what you need these so-called consensus protocols for. And we have all sorts of mechanisms to guard against that. I mean, there are dozens or hundreds of potential attacks, denial of service, and whatever. You could also create hundreds of thousands of transactions and try to swamp the network and all these things. And I mean, all the ones that are known, we have thought about and protect against it.
Okay. Any other questions? Here's one. In terms of the programming and learning to code, how long is the course? How much does it cost? And what language is it in, and how could one access this, for example. He says, as a South African, I think there is huge opportunity.
I should have mentioned that, of course. That was free. Not only was it free, we even paid the students a bit.
Wow. That's great.
Because I mean, especially for example, in the case of the Ethiopia course, the students, I mean, some of them basically quit their job in order to be able to participate in the course. So yes, we paid them, but it always was free. And I also firmly believe that education should be free. I'm not sure about languages. I mean, the course language is English, but the language we taught was Haskell, because that's what we used, the programming language. But the course itself was in English, or in the sorry excuse that I call English with my heavy German accent.
It's great. You should hear my German here at home. We swap places.
And I would love to do a course in South Africa. My wife is South African, so I would love to do a course in Cape Town, for example. So yeah, right. So of course, it's because it's 2 months and full time. It's still not easy for students to, because I mean, if you have a job, then you can't basically work a job and then do the course. Although one of the students in our Mongolia course last year, she did that. She had a full-time day job, and then at night she attended the course as well. Yeah, but normally you can't expect that, so that is a problem. But no, it's for free, and yeah, at least for free. And we will also, I mean, because the Mongolia course, as I said, didn't happen in person, unfortunately, so it was online. But the advantage was that we recorded all the lessons, and right now we're using them internally for my colleagues. And we are in the process of cleaning up the lessons and editing out all the pauses and so on. So the plan is definitely to also have a MOOC version of this Haskell course online, which is of course not the same experience as having individual feedback, but at least something. So we definitely want to do that as well. Same our smart contract course now, this Plutus course, that will also be freely available for everyone worldwide.
One of the things that I love about Germany is that universities are, for all purposes, practically free.
Right. I mean, as you know, if you live in Germany, patriotism is like not a thing here. I mean, but that is the one thing I always tell everybody I'm really proud about in Germany, that universities are free.
It's fantastic.
Almost free, yes.
Yeah, it took me 10 years to pay off my student loans. Well, then I think we'll bring it to an end.
Okay.
Dr. Lars Brünjes, if you have any final comments, the floor is yours.
Well, I'm just very happy that you invited me. So it was a lot of fun, and thank you very much for listening to me talking about Cardano.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming. And wow, there's a lot to learn, and we're very happy that you joined us today and could share a lot of the knowledge that you have.
Thank you very much for having me. It was really a pleasure.